The gravel crunched under my heels as I stepped out of the rental car, smoothing down the navy blue dress I'd spent 20 minutes picking out that morning. The old Henderson family farmhouse stretched before me, its white clapboard siding freshly painted, red geraniums spilling from window boxes that hadn't been there 15 years ago. Someone had clearly put effort into making this place look welcoming. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I checked my phone. Marcus would be here in an hour, maybe less if his flight landed early. The thought of his steady presence made my shoulders relax just slightly. 3 years of marriage, and he still had that effect on me, like having a secret weapon tucked in my back pocket. Except this weapon wore dress blues and had a smile that could disarm a room full of hostile diplomats. The front door opened before I could knock, and Aunt Helen emerged with her arms already spread wide, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. "Sarah Beth Morrison, look at you," she called out, using the full name that only family was allowed to use. "More beautiful every time I see you." I let myself be enveloped in her embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of vanilla and lavender that had clung to her for as long as I could remember. Aunt Helen had always been the safe harbor in our family, the one who remembered birthdays and sent care packages during college finals week. "You're early," she said, stepping back to study my face with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Good. Gives us time to catch up before the circus begins." Through the screen door, I could see the flurry of activity inside. Cousins I barely recognized setting up folding tables. Someone wrestling with a banner that read, "Henderson Family Reunion 2024, in cheerful red letters. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the backyard, punctuated by the occasional adult voice calling for someone to slow down or watch out for the flower beds. "How many are we expecting?" I asked, following Helen up the front steps. 43 at last count, she said with a slight grimace. "Your mother's been coordinating the whole thing like a military operation. Color-coded spreadsheets and everything." I smiled despite myself. That sounded exactly like Mom. Diana Henderson Walsh had turned organization into an art form, the kind of woman who labeled her label maker and maintained a filing system for her filing systems. It's probably where I got my attention to detail, though I'd channeled it into forensic accounting instead of family event planning. The screen door banged shut behind us, and immediately I was surrounded by the controlled chaos of reunion preparation. My cousin Emily waved from across the room where she was wrestling with a tablecloth that seemed determined to slide off despite her best efforts. Uncle Bob emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of deviled eggs, his face red from either exertion or the heat radiating from the oven. "Sarah!" Mom's voice cut through the chatter with laser precision. She appeared from what looked like a supply closet, arms full of paper plates and napkins, her ash blonde hair pulled back in the same practical ponytail she'd worn for every family gathering since I was 12. "Perfect timing, I need you to help me set up the beverage station." Before I could respond, she was already moving toward the kitchen, clearly expecting me to follow. This was Mom's default mode during family events: delegate with authority and assume compliance. It used to annoy me when I was younger, but now I recognized it for what it was: her way of managing anxiety by controlling everything she possibly could. The kitchen was a symphony of organized chaos. Casserole dishes covered every available surface. The slow cooker was bubbling with something that smelled like barbecue. And someone had commandeered the island for an elaborate dessert display. Mom handed me a stack of plastic cups and pointed toward a card table that had been set up near the back door. "Ice is in the cooler on the porch," she said, already moving on to inspect the arrangement of potato salad containers. "And make sure you put the diet sodas on the left side. Your Aunt Ruth has been watching her sugar again." I worked methodically, setting up the drink station with the same precision I used when organizing financial documents. Everything in its place, easy access, logical flow. It was soothing, actually, having a concrete task that required no emotional navigation. Through the kitchen window, I could see more family members arriving. Cars pulling up the long gravel driveway, doors slamming, voices calling out greetings. I recognized some faces immediately. My cousin David's distinctive laugh, Grandma Henderson's careful walk with her new cane, Uncle Jim's booming voice that could probably be heard 3 counties over. And then I saw him. Tyler emerged from a dusty pickup truck, moving with that same swagger he'd perfected in high school, all broad shoulders and confident stride. Even from a distance, I could see the way he surveyed the scene like he owned it, hands on his hips, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd put on weight since I'd seen him last. Not fat, but thick through the chest and arms, the kind of bulk that came from physical labor and too much beer. My stomach tightened automatically, an old reflex I'd hoped I'd outgrown. Tyler had always had that effect on me, ever since we were kids. 2 years older, loud enough for both of us, and blessed with the kind of natural charisma that made adults chuckle and shake their heads fondly when he got into trouble. While I spent my teenage years with my nose in books and my college years building a career, Tyler had bounced from job to job, town to town, always landing on his feet and always ready with a story that made his latest failure sound like an adventure. Mom had been giving me updates on his life whether I wanted them or not. Construction work in Colorado, a brief stint managing a bar in Oklahoma. Something about starting his own landscaping business that seemed to involve more drinking with clients than actual landscaping. The family always spoke about Tyler's free spirit and his different path, but I knew what they really meant. He was the charming screw-up, and they'd all agreed to pretend that was endearing instead of exhausting. "Your brother's here," Mom said, appearing at my elbow with perfect timing. She said it casually, but I caught the slight tension in her voice. Mom had been managing the Tyler situation for decades, always trying to keep the peace, always hoping this would be the family gathering where he didn't cause drama. Through the window, I watched Tyler approach the house, stopping to shake hands with Uncle Bob and ruffle the hair of a small cousin whose name I couldn't remember. Even from here, I could see the way people's faces lit up when they saw him. Tyler had always been magnetic like that, drawing people in with his easy laugh and his ability to make everyone feel like they were in on the joke. The screen door banged again, and Tyler's voice filled the kitchen before he'd even fully entered the room. "Well, well, well. Look who decided to grace us with her presence." I turned, keeping my expression neutral, professional, the same face I wore during difficult client meetings or tense negotiations. Tyler filled the doorway, grinning like he'd just delivered the punchline to a joke I wasn't in on. "Hello, Tyler," I said, my voice even and pleasant. "Good to see you." Quote. He moved into the kitchen with that same confident swagger, immediately commanding attention from everyone within a 10-foot radius. "Sarah Beth, still looking like you stepped out of a magazine. That fancy city living must agree with you." There was something in his tone that made it sound less like a compliment and more like an observation about my otherness. Too polished, too put together, too different from the rest of them. "I do all right," I said, turning back to arrange the remaining cups. "How's the landscaping business?" "Oh, you know me," Tyler said with a laugh that was just a little too loud. "Always keeping busy. Can't sit still long enough to get soft like some people." The comment hung in the air for a moment, and I felt Mom's attention sharpen beside me. This was how it always started with Tyler. Little digs wrapped in jokes, testing to see how much he could get away with before someone called him on it. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I smiled politely and moved to open a case of bottled water. "That's great, Tyler. I'm glad you're staying active." But I could feel him watching me, calculating. Tyler had always been able to read people, to find the exact pressure point that would get a reaction. It's what made him so good at charming his way out of trouble, and it's what made him dangerous when he wanted to cause some. The kitchen continued to bustle around us, family members flowing in and out, but I was hyper-aware of Tyler's presence. The way he positioned himself so he was always in my line of sight, the way his voice got just a little louder whenever I was speaking to someone else, the way he kept making those small comments that sounded friendly to anyone not paying close attention but carried just enough edge to keep me on guard. This was going to be a very long afternoon. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Landing now. Should be there in 45 minutes. How's the family reunion treating you?" I typed back quickly. "About what you'd expect. See you soon." His response was immediate. "Hang in there, beautiful. Backup is en route." I smiled despite myself, tucking the phone back into my purse. Tyler might think he still had the same power over me that he'd wielded when we were kids, but he was about to learn that I wasn't the same person I used to be. And more importantly, I hadn't come to this reunion alone. Growing up in Millbrook, Texas, population 3,847, Everyone knew the Henderson kids. Tyler was the golden boy who could throw a football 60 yards and talk his way out of detention with a grin and a promise to do better next time. I was the quiet one who always had her homework done and never caused trouble, which in a small town like ours meant I was either ignored or held up as an example of what good girls should be. Our father, Robert Henderson, worked the oil rigs for 23 years before a back injury forced him into early retirement. He was a man of few words and strong opinions, the kind who believed hard work could solve any problem and that actions spoke louder than anything you could say. When Tyler scored the winning touchdown against Oakville High, Dad bought him a steak dinner and told everyone at Murphy's Bar about his boy's arm. When I won the state math competition 2 years running, he nodded once and said I'd done good. Mom tried to balance the scales, but she'd grown up in the same small-town culture where boys were expected to be loud and girls were expected to be grateful for attention. She praised my grades and my good behavior, but there was always an undercurrent of relief in her voice, like she was thankful I wasn't causing the kind of trouble that required phone calls from school or visits from the sheriff. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Tyler and I were only 2 years apart, but it might as well have been a decade. He shot up early, hitting 6 feet by freshman year, all legs and elbows and boundless energy that needed an outlet. I stayed small until I was 16, bookish and serious, more comfortable in the library than on the football field, where Tyler held court every Friday night. The pattern started early. When we were 8 and 10, Tyler convinced me to climb the old oak tree behind our house, promising he'd help me get down. I made it halfway up before I froze, terrified and clinging to a branch while he laughed from the ground below. "Come on, Sarah Beth," he called up. "Don't be such a baby. Just jump down." When I finally worked up the courage to climb down on my own, scraped and shaking, he was already inside, telling Mom how I'd gotten myself stuck and he'd tried to help. It became his signature move, setting me up for failure, then positioning himself as either the hero who tried to help or the voice of reason pointing out my shortcomings. He'd dare me to ride my bike down Dead Man's Hill, then shake his head sadly when I chickened out. He'd promise to include me in games with his friends, then change the rules once they arrived so I couldn't keep up. The worst part wasn't the tricks themselves. It was how everyone else saw them. Tyler's friends thought he was hilarious. Adults called him spirited and said boys would be boys, even when his pranks crossed the line. Like the time he told me our goldfish had died and convinced me to bury an empty shoebox in the backyard while he hid the actual fish in his closet. Somehow I ended up being the one who was too sensitive, too serious, unable to take a joke. By middle school, I'd learned to navigate around Tyler's moods and schemes. I did my homework in my room instead of at the kitchen table where he could accidentally spill things on it. I stopped accepting his invitations to tag along with his friends. I found my own space in academic clubs and volunteer work at the animal shelter, places where being quiet and responsible were actually valued. But Tyler adapted too. As we got older, his methods became more sophisticated. He'd wait until family dinners to bring up my lack of a social life, wondering aloud if I was ever going to find a boyfriend or if I was planning to live with my books forever. He'd volunteer me for tasks I hadn't agreed to, then express disappointment when I couldn't follow through. "Sarah Beth said she'd help with the garage sale," he'd tell Mom, "but I guess she's too busy with her college applications." High school was when the divide really solidified. Tyler was starting quarterback, homecoming king, the kind of local celebrity that small towns create and worship. College recruiters came to our house on Thursday nights, sitting in our living room and talking about Tyler's potential, his natural leadership, his bright future. I spent those evenings in my room, working on scholarship applications and trying not to feel invisible. Tyler's grades were mediocre at best, but nobody seemed to care. He was going places on his athletic ability and his charm. I had a 4.0 GPA and perfect attendance, but that was just expected. Good girls did well in school. It wasn't special, it was basic. The scholarship offers for Tyler never materialized. A torn ACL during senior year ended his football dreams, and suddenly the boy who'd been everyone's golden child was just another kid from a small town with limited options. But even then, the family narrative didn't change. Tyler was dealing with disappointment. Tyler was finding his path. Tyler needed support and understanding. I got a full ride to University of Texas, but my acceptance letter arrived the same week Tyler's last college prospect fell through. Mom hugged me and said she was proud, but she spent the rest of the evening on the phone with Aunt Helen, discussing Tyler's options and what could be done to help him get back on track. College was my escape. 4 hours away from Millbrook, surrounded by people who valued academic achievement and intellectual curiosity, I finally found my place. I joined study groups and debate teams. I made friends who thought reading was a hobby, not a character flaw. I dated boys who were impressed by my ambition instead of threatened by it. Tyler, meanwhile, drifted. He took classes at the community college for a semester before dropping out. He worked at the hardware store, then quit to try construction. He moved in with a girlfriend in the next town over, then moved back home when that relationship imploded. Every family conversation included updates on Tyler's latest plan or setback, while my academic achievements were mentioned briefly before the conversation moved on to more pressing concerns. The summer after my sophomore year, I came home with a paid internship at an accounting firm in Austin. It was a big deal. Competitive, prestigious, the kind of opportunity that could shape my entire career. Tyler had just been fired from his job at the lumberyard for showing up late too many times. Guess which one dominated dinner conversation that night? Tyler's going through a rough patch, Mom explained, as if that justified the way he'd monopolized an entire hour complaining about his boss, his coworkers, and the unfairness of workplace expectations. He just needs to find the right fit. I wanted to scream. Tyler was 22 years old, and he'd never held a job for more than 6 months. But somehow, his pattern of irresponsibility was treated as a series of unfortunate circumstances, while my successes were taken for granted. The breaking point came during my senior year. I'd been accepted to graduate school with a full assistantship, an achievement that had taken years of careful planning and hard work. Tyler had just moved back home again after another failed business venture, this time a lawn care service that folded when he spent the equipment money on a fishing boat. I called home excited to share my news, and Mom answered the phone already talking about Tyler's latest crisis. He needed money for rent. He needed help finding a new job. He needed family support during this difficult transition. 10 minutes into the conversation, I managed to interrupt long enough to mention my graduate school acceptance. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey," Mom said, her voice distracted. "You always were the smart one. Listen, do you think you could talk to Tyler? He's really struggling right now, and maybe hearing from his little sister would help." His little sister. 21 years old, with a bachelor's degree and a graduate school acceptance. And I was still just Tyler's little sister, who might be useful for cheering him up. That's when I realized the truth that had been staring me in the face for years. In my family's story, Tyler was the protagonist going through challenges and setbacks, learning and growing and deserving of sympathy. I was a supporting character, successful enough to be useful but not interesting enough to be the center of attention. I stopped calling home as much after that. I threw myself into my studies, built a life in Austin, found my own path that had nothing to do with Millbrook or the Henderson family dynamics. I dated, made friends, built a career that actually mattered to people who weren't related to me. But I never stopped feeling like Tyler's little sister when I came home. Never stopped feeling the old familiar tightness in my chest when he walked into a room and immediately became the most important person there. Never stopped waiting for someone to notice that maybe, just maybe, I'd accomplished something worth celebrating too. Even when I met Marcus during my first year working in Dallas, even when I fell in love with a man who thought my intelligence was sexy and my ambitions were admirable, even when I built a life that had nothing to do with small-town hierarchies or childhood roles, I still felt my confidence falter every time Tyler's name came up in family conversations. Because the truth was, no matter how far I traveled or how much I achieved, part of me was still that 8-year-old girl stuck in a tree, waiting for someone to help her down while her big brother laughed from below. Until today. Today I wasn't coming home alone. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across the backyard where 3 generations of Hendersons were scattered across folding chairs and picnic blankets. Someone had strung lights between the oak trees, though they wouldn't be needed for another few hours. The smell of barbecue drifted from Uncle Jim's smoker, mixing with the sweet scent of honeysuckle that climbed the back fence. I'd found a spot at one of the tables with my cousin Rebecca and her teenage daughter Madison, listening to stories about Madison's senior year drama and college plans. It was pleasant, normal family conversation. The kind I'd forgotten was possible when Tyler wasn't actively working to be the center of attention. He'd been holding court near the smoker for the past hour, regaling a captive audience with stories from his latest construction job. Something about a difficult client and a roof that had to be rebuilt twice. But in Tyler's telling, it became an epic tale of incompetent supervisors and his own heroic problem-solving. Uncle Jim and a few of the male cousins were laughing and nodding along, occasionally throwing in their own work war stories. Madison was telling me about her acceptance to Texas A&M when I felt my phone buzz. Marcus, texting from the rental car, 5 minutes out, fair warning, bringing 3 of the guys. They were in town for training and wanted to meet the family. I smiled, typing back, the more the merrier. Can't wait to see you. Rebecca noticed my expression. That's the look of a woman whose husband is about to arrive, she said with a grin. I still remember when you first told us about Marcus. Never seen you light up like that before. Madison looked up from her phone. Mom showed me pictures from your wedding. Your husband looks like he could be in movies. He's pretty easy on the eyes, I admitted, glancing toward the driveway. And he's bringing some friends from work. Ooh, single friends? Madison asked, with the shameless curiosity of a 17-year-old. Madison, Rebecca warned, but she was smiling too. Before I could answer, Tyler's voice cut across the yard, pitched loud enough to interrupt every conversation within 50 feet. Hey, Sarah Beth, come over here and settle an argument for us. The tone was casual, friendly even, but I recognized the command beneath it. This wasn't a request. It was Tyler summoning me to perform whatever role he needed me to play in his current story. What kind of argument? I called back, not moving from my seat. Jimmy here thinks women can't handle real construction work, Tyler said, gesturing toward our cousin Jim's oldest son. I told him about that time you tried to help Dad build the deck and nearly cut your finger off with the circular saw. The comment hit like a small electric shock. I remembered that day. I'd been 15, eager to help with the family project, and Dad had actually been teaching me how to use the saw properly when Tyler decided to help by distracting me at exactly the wrong moment. The cut had been minor, but Tyler had made such a production of getting the first aid kit and announcing to everyone that Sarah Beth tried to lose a finger that it became family legend. That was 20 years ago, Tyler, I said evenly, and I seem to remember you being the one who thought it would be funny to shout fire right as I was making the cut. A few people chuckled nervously. Tyler's grin didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Come on, don't be like that. We're just having a conversation about different people having different strengths. There it was, the subtle twist that made me the unreasonable one for objecting to his story. The implication that I was being oversensitive, unable to take a joke, ruining everyone's fun by pointing out inconvenient details. I think I'll stay here, I said calmly. Madison was telling me about her college plans. Tyler's expression darkened just slightly. He wasn't used to being turned down, especially not in front of an audience. Ah, come on, don't make me come over there and drag you. The comment was delivered with a laugh, but there was an edge to it that made several people shift uncomfortably. Rebecca's hand found mine under the table, a small gesture of solidarity. I'm good where I am, I repeated, keeping my voice pleasant but firm. Tyler stood up from his chair, brushing barbecue sauce off his hands with deliberate slowness. Sarah Beth, don't be rude. These folks want to hear about your fancy city job anyway. Come tell them about all those numbers you crunch. He started walking toward our table, and I felt that old familiar tightness in my chest. This was how it always escalated with Tyler. A request that became a demand that became a physical presence, imposing itself on whatever space you'd tried to claim. Tyler, she said she's fine where she is, Rebecca said quietly, but loud enough for him to hear. Nobody asked you, Becca, Tyler replied without looking at her. His attention was fixed on me now, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was deciding how far to push this, how much he could get away with in front of family without crossing the line into obvious bullying. Madison had gone very still beside me, her teenage radar picking up on the tension that all the adults were trying to pretend wasn't there. This was Tyler's specialty, creating situations where any response you made seemed disproportionate to what he was actually doing. He reached our table and put his hands on the back of my chair, leaning down so his face was close to mine. "Come on, little sister. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The smell of beer was strong on his breath, though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. Tyler had always been a casual day drinker at family events, but something about his energy today felt more aggressive than usual. "Tyler, you're making everyone uncomfortable," I said quietly, trying to keep this from becoming a scene. "I'm making people uncomfortable?" He laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Sarah Beth, you've been sitting over here acting too good to talk to your own family all afternoon. You show up to one reunion in 5 years, and you can't even be bothered to socialize." There it was. The accusation wrapped in concern, the way he could make my boundaries sound like character flaws. Several relatives were watching now, and I could feel their discomfort mixing with that particular family dynamic where nobody wanted to get involved, but everybody had opinions. "I've been socializing just fine," I said, standing up so he couldn't loom over me anymore. "I've talked to Aunt Helen, helped Mom set up, and I've been having a lovely conversation with Rebecca and Madison." "Oh, a lovely conversation," Tyler repeated, his voice dripping with mock sophistication. "Excuse me, I forgot we had royalty in attendance. My mistake, Your Majesty." The mocking tone was designed to make me react, to push me into either backing down or escalating to the point where I looked like the problem. It was Tyler's masterpiece, making you choose between looking weak or looking crazy. But before I could respond, the sound of car doors slamming came from the front of the house. Multiple doors, more than one vehicle. My heart jumped, recognizing the pattern of coordinated arrival that meant Marcus and his team had just pulled up. Tyler heard it too, his head turning toward the sound. "Expecting someone?" he asked, but his cocky confidence had developed a slight crack. "My husband," I said simply, "and some of his colleagues." For the first time all afternoon, Tyler looked uncertain. He'd never met Marcus, had only heard family descriptions that probably hadn't emphasized the more intimidating aspects of my husband's profession. But he could hear voices now, multiple male voices moving through the house toward the backyard, and something about the cadence of their movement was distinctly military. The back door opened, and Marcus stepped onto the patio, scanning the yard until his eyes found mine. Even in civilian clothes, khakis and a polo shirt, there was something unmistakably commanding about his presence. 6'2", broad shoulders, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of training and real-world experience. Behind him came 3 other men, similar bearing, similar watchful alertness, as they took in the scene. They weren't in uniform, but they carried themselves like soldiers, like men who were used to moving as a unit and assessing threats automatically. Marcus's gaze went from my face to Tyler's position behind my chair, and I saw his expression shift subtly. Not angry, not aggressive, just alert in a way that made the air around him seem to sharpen. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "Everything all right over there?" Quote. Tyler's hands slipped off the back of my chair. The casual confidence he'd worn all afternoon was evaporating as he realized he was no longer the most physically imposing person in the yard. Marcus was walking toward us with the easy, measured pace of someone who didn't need to hurry because he was absolutely certain of his ability to handle whatever situation he was walking into. The 3 men with him had spread out slightly, not obviously, not aggressively, but enough to give them clear sight lines and room to move. It was subtle, professional, and completely unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read tactical positioning. "Tyler," I said calmly, "I'd like you to meet my husband, Marcus. Marcus, this is my brother, Tyler." Marcus extended his hand, his smile polite but his eyes never leaving Tyler's face. "Tyler, good to finally meet you. Sarah's told me so much about you." Tyler shook his hand, but I could see the moment he realized he was dealing with someone whose handshake had been calibrated by years of military training. His swagger dimmed further, uncertainty replacing the bullying confidence he'd worn just moments before. "Marcus," Tyler said, his voice missing its earlier volume. "Nice to meet you too. These are my colleagues," Marcus continued smoothly. "Dave, Rodriguez, and Chen. We were in the area for training exercises and thought we'd stop by to meet the family." The three men nodded politely, but their positioning around the table was no accident. Tyler might not understand military tactics, but even he could recognize when he was suddenly outnumbered by people who looked like they could bench press his truck. The backyard had gone very quiet, all conversation suspended as family members tried to process this new dynamic. Tyler was still standing behind my chair, but his entire demeanor had changed. The physical intimidation he'd been building toward had evaporated the moment he realized I hadn't come to this reunion alone and defenseless. "Well," Tyler said finally, his voice artificially cheerful, "this is nice, a real family gathering." But I could see it in his eyes. The dawning realization that the little sister he'd been pushing around for 30 years had just introduced him to 4 men who looked like they could end him without breaking a sweat. And Marcus hadn't even told him what they did for a living yet. The introduction should have been the end of it. Tyler should have backed down, made some excuse about needing another beer, and found a different corner of the yard to occupy. That's how confrontations usually worked with him. Push until you hit resistance, then retreat and regroup for another angle of attack. But Tyler had been drinking since noon, and 34 years of being the biggest, loudest person in most rooms doesn't die easily. Instead of backing down, he doubled down. "So Marcus," Tyler said, his voice carrying that false friendliness that meant trouble was coming, "what kind of work do you and your buddies do? Sarah Beth never told us much about your job." Marcus's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Military," he said simply. "We work together on various assignments." "Military, huh?" Tyler's grin had an edge to it now. "What, like National Guard weekends? Desk jobs at the base?" The question was designed to diminish, to find a way to make Marcus and his colleagues seem less impressive than they appeared. Tyler couldn't stand not being the alpha male in any group, and he was fishing for something that would let him regain his position. "Something like that," Marcus replied evenly, but Rodriguez shifted slightly, and I saw Chen's jaw tighten. These men were used to being underestimated, but they weren't used to being deliberately disrespected by civilians. Tyler pressed on, emboldened by what he mistook for evasiveness. "Must be nice having a wife with a good job to fall back on. Government work probably doesn't pay what the private sector does. Am I right?" The insult was layered, questioning Marcus's ability to provide for me, suggesting he was somehow lesser because I had a successful career, implying that military service wasn't real work compared to Tyler's construction background. I felt the temperature in our little corner of the yard drop several degrees. Dave took a half step forward, almost imperceptibly, but Marcus raised his hands slightly. A gesture so small I almost missed it, but it stopped Dave in his tracks. "I do all right," Marcus said, his voice still calm but carrying a new undertone that made my spine straighten. "Sarah's success is her own. I'm just lucky she chose to share her life with someone like me." It was a perfect response, deflecting Tyler's attempt to create conflict while subtly pointing out that he was the one who'd won the prize Tyler was trying to diminish. But Tyler was too drunk and too threatened to recognize the warning signs. "Someone like you?" Tyler repeated, his laugh getting uglier. "Yeah, I bet you're real grateful. Landing a smart girl like Sarah Beth when you're probably just another grunt following orders." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children playing across the yard seemed to sense something had shifted, their voices dropping to whispers. Uncle Jim had stopped tending the smoker and was watching our table with a growing alarm. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting something that looked like an ID card. He handed it to Tyler with the same casual motion he might use to pass the salt. Tyler looked down at the card, and I watched his face change. The color drained from his cheeks, and his cocky grin disappeared entirely. He stared at the ID for a long moment, then looked up at Marcus with something approaching panic in his eyes. "Delta Force," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying just far enough for our immediate group to hear. "That's what we do, Tyler. Dave, Rodriguez, Chen, and myself. We're on leave from our last deployment. Thought we'd take the opportunity to meet Sarah's family." Tyler's hand trembled slightly as he handed the ID back. The implications were sinking in. He'd just insulted 4 of the most elite soldiers in the American military, Men who'd probably forgotten more about real combat than Tyler would ever know about anything. I didn't realize, Tyler stammered, but his brain was still marinated in alcohol and wounded pride. Instead of cutting his losses, he made the worst possible choice. Look, I don't care what your fancy ID says. This is family business, and Sarah Beth needs to stop hiding behind her husband and his friends. He reached for my arm as he said it, his fingers closing around my wrist with enough force to make me wince. It wasn't violent, not exactly, but it was possessive, controlling, Tyler's way of asserting ownership over me in front of the men who'd just proven they outranked him in every way that mattered. Tyler, let go, I said firmly, trying to pull my arm free. We're not done talking, he said, his grip tightening. You've been acting like you're too good for this family all day, and I'm tired of it. That's when Marcus moved. I'd seen my husband in action during training exercises, watched him move with the fluid precision that came from years of specialized combat training. But this was different. This was Marcus protecting his wife, and the controlled violence in his movement was absolutely terrifying. He didn't grab Tyler's arm or shout a warning. Instead, he placed one hand on Tyler's shoulder, gently, almost casually, and applied pressure to a specific point that made Tyler's entire body seize up. Tyler's grip on my wrist released immediately, as every nerve in his arm went numb. I think you should step back now, Marcus said conversationally, as if he were suggesting Tyler try the potato salad. Tyler jerked away, rubbing his shoulder and staring at Marcus with a mixture of shock and rage. What the hell was that? A request, Marcus replied calmly. One I hope you'll consider seriously. But Tyler's pride was wounded now, and alcohol had stripped away whatever common sense he might have possessed. Instead of backing down, he did the one thing that crossed every line and sealed his fate. He shoved me. It wasn't a gentle push or an accidental bump. Tyler put his full weight behind it, both hands against my shoulders, sending me stumbling backward toward the fence. I might have caught myself, but my heel caught on the uneven ground, and I went down hard, landing on my hip and scraping my palm on the gravel. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children had stopped playing. 43 members of the Henderson family watched as Tyler Henderson, golden boy, hometown hero, beloved big brother, stood over his sister, fists clenched, breathing hard like an animal that had just marked its territory. Marcus didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Dave and Rodriguez moved first, flanking Tyler from both sides with the synchronized precision of men who'd executed this exact maneuver hundreds of times, in situations where lives depended on it. Tyler found himself facing 4 elite soldiers who'd gone from polite dinner guests to a tactical unit in the space of a heartbeat. Chen was already helping me to my feet, his touch gentle but his eyes never leaving Tyler. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "I'm fine," I said, brushing gravel from my palm. But I wasn't fine, not really. The shock of being physically attacked by my own brother in front of my entire family was still sinking in. Marcus was walking toward Tyler now, and there was something in his movement that made the hair on my arms stand up. This wasn't anger. Anger was hot and unpredictable. This was something much more dangerous. A professional soldier responding to a threat against someone he was sworn to protect. "Tyler," Marcus said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from commanding men in life or death situations. "You just put your hands on my wife." Tyler backed up a step, finally seeming to realize the magnitude of what he'd done. But he was cornered now, surrounded by family members who were staring at him in shock, and 4 soldiers who looked like they were deciding whether to arrest him or just end him. She's my sister," Tyler said weakly, as if that somehow justified assault. "She's my wife," Marcus replied, and the finality in his voice made Tyler go very pale. "And you just committed a crime in front of 40 witnesses." Uncle Jim stepped forward then, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "Tyler, what the hell is wrong with you? You can't put your hands on people like that." "It's family business," Tyler protested, but his voice was getting higher, more desperate. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Marcus interrupted. "You're a grown man who just physically assaulted a woman because she wouldn't do what you wanted. That's not family business. That's criminal behavior." The reality of his situation was finally penetrating Tyler's alcohol-fogged brain. He was surrounded by military personnel who'd just watched him commit assault and battery. His own family was staring at him in horror. And the sister he'd spent his whole life pushing around was standing next to a man who could probably kill him 17 different ways, without breaking a sweat. "Look, I didn't mean," Tyler started, but Rodriguez cut him off. "Sir, you need to apologize to the lady and remove yourself from this gathering," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the kind of polite menace that military professionals use when they're being generous with their warnings. Tyler looked around desperately, searching for an ally, someone who would tell these outsiders they didn't understand the Henderson family dynamic. But Mom was staring at him in shock, Dad had his head in his hands, and every cousin and aunt and uncle was looking at him like they'd never seen him before. Because they hadn't, not really. They'd seen Tyler the charmer, Tyler the joker, Tyler the local hero, fallen on hard times. They'd never seen Tyler the man who would physically assault his sister, because she wouldn't submit to his authority. "Sarah Beth," Tyler said finally, his voice breaking slightly. I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," I said quietly, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "You meant every bit of it, Tyler, you always have." He opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus stepped forward again. "Tyler," Marcus said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You're going to leave now. You're going to get in your truck and drive away, and you're not going to contact Sarah again unless she decides she wants to hear from you." "You can't tell me what to do," Tyler said, but there was no fight left in him. "Actually," Dave said conversationally, "we can. Assault and battery is a federal crime when it involves military personnel and their families. We could have you arrested right now." Tyler's face went white. But you're not in uniform." "Doesn't matter," Chen said cheerfully. "We're still federal agents. And what you just did, that's going in our report." That was a lie, probably, but Tyler didn't know that. What he knew was that he'd just gone from being the tough guy at a family reunion to facing potential federal charges in front of everyone who'd ever known him. "This isn't over," Tyler said weakly, but he was already backing toward the driveway. "Yes," Marcus said with absolute finality. "It is." Tyler Henderson, hometown football hero, family golden boy, and lifelong bully, walked to his truck and drove away while 43 members of his extended family watched in silence. And for the first time in my life, nobody suggested that maybe I should forgive him or try to understand his side of things. Because some things don't have two sides. Some things are just wrong. And everyone had finally seen it. The silence that followed Tyler's departure stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. 43 people stood frozen in their lawn chairs and picnic spots, processing what they'd just witnessed. The golden boy of the Henderson family had just physically assaulted his sister and been escorted off the property by Delta Force operators. Nobody had a script for what came next. Aunt Helen moved first, hurrying over with a dish towel full of ice and that take-charge energy she'd perfected during 40 years of nursing. "Sarah, honey, let me look at that hand," she said, gently taking my scraped palm and examining it with professional efficiency. The small kindness almost broke me. After years of Tyler's behavior being minimized, dismissed, or excused, having someone immediately focus on my welfare instead of his feelings was overwhelming. "It's just a scrape," I said, but my voice came out shakier than I intended. "Scrapes can get infected," Aunt Helen replied firmly, cleaning the gravel out of my palm with the same no-nonsense care she'd used when Tyler and I were children. "Marcus, there's a first aid kit in the kitchen, top shelf next to the refrigerator." Marcus was already moving before she finished the sentence, but Dave stepped forward. "I've got this, sir," he said, producing a compact medical kit from somewhere inside his polo shirt. Apparently, Delta Force operators traveled prepared for everything, including family reunion injuries. While Dave cleaned and bandaged my hand with military precision, I became aware of the conversation starting up around us. Low voices, urgent whispers, the sound of a family trying to process an earthquake in their carefully constructed mythology. "I can't believe he actually pushed her," someone said. "Did you see how those soldiers moved? like they'd rehearsed it. Tyler's been drinking since he got here, but still, 34 years old and acting like a teenager. Mom appeared at my elbow, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Tyler would. He's never. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence because we both knew it wasn't true. Tyler had been escalating to this moment for decades. I know, Mom, I said gently. You couldn't have predicted this. But even as I said it, I wondered if that was really true. How many family gatherings had ended with Tyler storming off because he didn't get his way? How many times had his jokes crossed lines that everyone pretended not to see? Maybe none of us could have predicted he'd actually push me, but the pattern had been building for years. Dad approached more slowly, his weathered face creased with something between shame and confusion. He'd always been Tyler's champion, the one who made excuses for his behavior and celebrated his potential. Watching his golden boy get put in his place by real soldiers had clearly shaken something fundamental in his worldview. Sarah Beth, he said quietly, your husband and his friends, they handled that real professional like Tyler was out of line. It was probably the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from Dad, and certainly the first time he'd ever criticized Tyler's behavior without immediately adding a but to excuse it. Rodriguez had positioned himself near the back door, casually monitoring the driveway to make sure Tyler didn't return. Chen was making small talk with some of the male cousins, but I could see him subtly assessing the mood of the gathering, making sure no one else was planning to cause problems. These men had shifted seamlessly from wedding guests to protective detail, and they were treating it like any other mission. Marcus returned to my side, his hand finding the small of my back in that protective gesture that had become second nature to him. How are you feeling? He asked quietly. Honestly, relieved, I said, and realized I meant it. I've been waiting 30 years for someone to see Tyler the way I see him. I just never imagined it would happen like this. Uncle Jim had taken charge of the barbecue situation, rallying some of the men to help serve the food that had been ready for 20 minutes but forgotten in the chaos. It was his way of trying to restore normalcy, to prove that one person's bad behavior couldn't ruin everyone else's day. But normalcy felt fragile now. Tyler had been such a central figure in family gatherings, the storyteller, the entertainer, the one who could always make people laugh, that his absence left a noticeable void. Without his dominating presence, conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. People were actually listening to each other, instead of waiting for Tyler to interrupt with a louder, more dramatic story. Madison, Rebecca's teenage daughter, approached our table with the careful steps of someone trying not to intrude. Sarah, I just wanted to say, what Tyler did wasn't okay, at all. I've never seen a grown man act like that. Thank you, Madison, I said. That means more than you know. She hesitated, then added, my mom told me Tyler used to be really popular in high school, but popularity doesn't mean you get to hurt people. Out of the mouths of babes, a 17-year-old had just articulated something that 3 generations of Henderson adults had been unwilling to acknowledge. The afternoon progressed with an odd mixture of tension and relief. People kept glancing toward the driveway as if Tyler might return, but there was also a sense of freedom in the air. Conversations that had been interrupted by Tyler's need for attention could finally unfold naturally. Quiet family members who usually got overshadowed were sharing stories and jokes. Cousin Rebecca pulled me aside while Marcus was deep in conversation with Dad about military logistics. Sarah, I owe you an apology, she said. I've watched Tyler treat you badly for years, and I never said anything. I always told myself it was just sibling stuff, that you could handle it. It's not your fault, Rebecca. Maybe not, but I could have spoken up. We all could have. She looked around the yard, where pockets of family members were having similar quiet conversations. I think a lot of us are realizing we enabled this by staying silent. The hardest conversation came when my phone rang 2 hours later. Tyler's name appeared on the screen, and the entire table went quiet. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a silent question about whether I wanted him to handle it. I shook my head and answered, Tyler. Sarah Beth. His voice was thick. Whether from continued drinking or emotion, I couldn't tell. I fucked up. Really bad. Yes, you did. I never meant to hurt you. You have to know that. I don't know what happened. Seeing you with those guys, acting like you were too good to talk to family. There it was. Even in his apology, Tyler couldn't resist making it partially my fault. I'd somehow provoked him by having the audacity to bring backup to a family gathering. Tyler, you pushed me to the ground because I wouldn't let you control the conversation. That's not a misunderstanding. That's assault. Come on, don't be dramatic. It wasn't assault, it was just family stuff got heated. The casual dismissal of what he'd done hit me like a physical blow. Even now, even after being humiliated in front of the entire family, Tyler couldn't accept responsibility for his actions. Tyler, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to really hear me. What you did today wasn't family stuff. It was criminal behavior. If Marcus and his team hadn't been here, if this had happened somewhere else, you could be in jail right now. Quote, "Those guys don't scare me," Tyler said, but his voice lacked conviction. They should, and more importantly, they shouldn't have to. You shouldn't need the threat of federal agents to keep you from putting your hands on people. Silence on the line. Then, so what? You're never going to speak to me again? You're going to let some soldiers turn you against your own family. Tyler, you turned me against you when you decided to physically assault me rather than accept that I have boundaries. Marcus and his team didn't create this problem. They just made sure it stopped. Sarah Beth, come on, we're family, we can work this out. No, I said firmly. We can't work this out by pretending it didn't happen or wasn't that serious. You need help, Tyler. Professional help. And until you get it and make real changes, I don't want you contacting me. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. And Tyler? If you ever put your hands on me again, Marcus won't be as restrained as he was today. I hung up before he could respond, my hands trembling slightly. Around the table, my family was watching with expressions ranging from pride to concern to relief. How do you feel? Marcus asked. Like I just set a boundary I should have set 20 years ago, I said. The rest of the evening unfolded with a strange sense of peace. Without Tyler's dominating presence, other family members stepped into leadership roles. Cousin David, usually quiet and overshadowed, turned out to be a gifted storyteller when given the space. Aunt Ruth, who typically stayed in the background, shared hilarious stories about her travels with her late husband. As we helped clean up after dinner, Mom pulled me aside near the kitchen sink. Sarah, I've been thinking about what happened today, about Tyler. Mom, you don't have to. No, I do. I've been making excuses for him for years. Telling myself he was just spirited, or going through a rough patch, or didn't mean it the way it sounded. But watching him today, seeing how scared he looked when your husband's friends stepped in, I realized something. She paused, scrubbing a casserole dish with more force than necessary. Tyler's not a boy anymore. He's a grown man who chose to physically assault his sister because she wouldn't do what he wanted. And I've been enabling that behavior by treating it like a personality quirk instead of a serious problem. Quote, "It was the most honest conversation my mother and I had ever had about Tyler, and it left me feeling both vindicated and sad. Vindicated because finally, someone in my family was seeing the situation clearly. Sad because it had taken a public humiliation and the threat of federal charges to get us here." As Marcus and I drove back to our hotel that evening, I found myself thinking about all the family gatherings I'd dreaded, all the times I'd left early, or made excuses not to attend because I couldn't face another round of Tyler's dominance games. Next year, I said to Marcus, I think I'll actually look forward to the reunion. Because Tyler won't be there? Because Tyler won't be running it, I corrected. There's a difference. Marcus reached over and took my hand, careful of the bandaged palm. I'm proud of you, he said. For standing your ground, for setting boundaries, for not backing down when he tried to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. I had good backup, I said, smiling at him. You did, he agreed, but you didn't need us to know your worth, Sarah. You just needed us to make sure everyone else could see it too. As we pulled into the hotel parking lot, I realized something had fundamentally shifted today. For the first time in my life, I'd attended a Henderson family gathering and left feeling stronger instead of smaller. Tyler had pushed me down, literally and figuratively, for the last time. And everyone, including me, finally understood that some behavior is unacceptable, no matter how you're related to the person doing it. 6 months later, the text message appeared on my phone while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my downtown Dallas office. Tyler's name on the screen still made my stomach tighten reflexively, but the message itself was different from his usual pattern. Sarah, I'm in rehab. 90-day program in Oklahoma, day 47. Would like to call you when I get out if that's okay. No pressure. Just wanted you to know I'm trying. I stared at the message for a long time before showing it to Marcus that evening over dinner. He read it twice, then set the phone down carefully. How do you feel about it? He asked. Surprised, I said honestly. I didn't think he'd actually get help. Mom mentioned he'd been fired from another job, but she didn't say anything about rehab. Marcus cut into his steak, considering. 90 days is serious. That's not a weekend detox program. 3 weeks later, Tyler called. His voice sounded different, clearer, but also more uncertain. Gone was the easy confidence that had carried him through 34 years of charming his way out of consequences. Sarah Beth, thank you for taking my call. How are you doing, Tyler? Different, he said after a pause. Learning things about myself I didn't want to know. My counselor says I've been using alcohol to avoid dealing with my problems, and I've been using anger to control situations I felt insecure about. The language was textbook therapy speak, but something in his tone suggested he was actually absorbing it, rather than just repeating it. The family reunion, he continued. I've talked about it a lot here, about how I felt when I saw you with Marcus and his friends. How small it made me feel, seeing you successful and protected while I was what I was. That doesn't excuse what you did. No, it doesn't. Nothing excuses putting my hands on you. I'm not calling to make excuses. I'm calling to take responsibility. We talked for 20 minutes. Tyler told me about the program, about group therapy sessions where other men shared stories that sounded uncomfortably familiar. He talked about anger management techniques and the difference between explaining behavior and excusing it. I want to make amends, he said near the end of the call. But my sponsor says I need to do it right. Not just saying sorry and expecting everything to go back to how it was. Actually changing how I act. What would that look like, I asked. I don't know yet. But I know it starts with me not expecting you to make this easy for me. You set a boundary, and I need to respect it whether I like it or not. After we hung up, I felt cautiously hopeful, not naive. I'd seen Tyler manipulate his way through too many situations to trust words alone, but hopeful that maybe, finally, he was facing the reality of who he'd become. Christmas at Mom and Dad's house was different. Tyler was still in Oklahoma, working at a restaurant and attending outpatient meetings. For the first time in memory, no one spent the holiday managing Tyler's moods or cleaning up his messes. Dad seemed older somehow, quieter. During a rare moment alone, he told me something that surprised me. I always worried about Tyler, he said. Worried he wouldn't amount to anything without someone propping him up. So I kept propping him up. Made excuses, gave him chances, told myself he just needed more time to mature. And me? Quote, Dad smiled ruefully. I never worried about you. You were smart, responsible, determined. I figured you'd be fine no matter what. What I didn't realize was that by always rescuing Tyler, I was teaching him he didn't have to face consequences. And by never defending you from his behavior, I was teaching you that your feelings didn't matter as much as keeping the peace. It wasn't a full apology, but it was acknowledgement. After 34 years, my father was finally seeing the family dynamics clearly. Tyler returned to Texas in March, sober, and genuinely changed in ways that became apparent gradually. He got a job with a roofing company and kept it. He found his own apartment instead of moving back in with our parents. When he spoke at family gatherings, he listened more than he performed. The real test came at Cousin Rebecca's birthday party. Tyler arrived late, apologized quietly for missing dinner, and found a seat without making it about him. When someone asked about his work, he answered briefly and turned the conversation to the birthday girl. Later, as people were saying goodbye, Tyler approached Marcus and me near our car. Sarah, I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that every day I work on making sure it never happens again, to you or anyone else. I appreciate that, Tyler. Marcus, Tyler said, turning to my husband, I owe you an apology too. You and your friends were protecting Sarah from someone who should have been protecting her himself. That someone was me, and I failed completely. Marcus nodded, his expression neutral but not hostile. She doesn't need protecting from her family, Tyler. She should be able to count on them. I know that now. The conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it felt significant. Tyler wasn't asking for forgiveness or expecting everything to return to normal. He was simply acknowledging reality and taking responsibility for his part in it. Driving home, Marcus asked the question I'd been pondering myself. Do you trust him? I trust that he's working on himself, I said carefully. I don't trust that the work is finished. But for the first time in my life, I feel like Tyler sees me as a person instead of a character in his story. That's something. It's a start. The relationship that emerged over the following months wasn't the sibling bond our parents had always hoped we'd have. It was more cautious, more respectful, and infinitely more honest. Tyler asked permission instead of assuming compliance. He apologized when he overstepped, instead of defending his intentions. Most importantly, he never again confused his feelings with my reality. For the first time in our lives, Tyler and I related to each other as equals. Two adults who happened to share DNA and a complicated history, working to build something better from the wreckage of what came before. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy. But it was real. And that was enough. 2 years later, I stood in the same backyard where Tyler had pushed me down, but everything was different. The Henderson family reunion was happening again, and for the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely excited to be there. Tyler was present, but not dominant. He helped with setup without taking charge, contributed to conversations without hijacking them, and when his nephew scraped his knee, Tyler quietly cleaned the wound and applied a bandage without turning it into a performance about his helpfulness. During a quiet moment, I found myself talking with Madison, Rebecca's daughter, now a college sophomore studying psychology. You know what I learned from watching your situation with Tyler, she said? That sometimes the people who love you the most enable the people who hurt you the most. Not because they're bad people, but because they're scared of conflict. Smart kid. She was right. Love and protection aren't the same thing, and sometimes real love requires difficult conversations and firm boundaries. As the evening wound down, Marcus and I sat on the back porch where I'd once felt small and powerless. Now I felt grounded, secure in my own worth, and surrounded by people who respected my boundaries. Any regrets? Marcus asked, nodding toward Tyler, who was loading folding chairs into his truck without fanfare. About the confrontation? No. About how long it took me to stand up for myself? Maybe. Marcus took my hand, the same one Tyler had grabbed that day. You stood up for yourself when you were ready. When you had the support you needed and the strength to handle the consequences. He was right. There's no perfect timeline for finding your voice or establishing your worth. Some people have to wait until they're strong enough to weather the storm that comes with setting boundaries. Some people need backup before they can face their bullies. That's not a weakness. That's strategy. The woman who got pushed down at that reunion 2 years ago was the same woman who'd spent her whole life achieving, excelling, and proving herself worthy of respect. But she'd been fighting those battles alone, surrounded by people who prioritized peace over protection. The woman sitting on this porch tonight had learned something fundamental. Your worth doesn't depend on other people's recognition of it, but your safety might depend on other people's enforcement of it. If you're dealing with someone who won't respect your boundaries, who dismisses your feelings, who uses family relationships or shared history to justify unacceptable behavior, you're not required to handle it alone. You're not selfish for seeking support. You're not disloyal for protecting yourself. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst behavior. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for yourself is surround yourself with people who see your worth clearly and will stand with you when others refuse to. Tyler pushed me down that day thinking he was asserting his dominance over his little sister. Instead, he learned that I wasn't little anymore, and I wasn't alone. Neither are you. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.